As I told you earlier, Cardinal George Pell's conviction on charges of sex abuse was unanimously overturned by the Australian High Court this week. He's now a free man, but where does he go to get his reputation back? Joining me now to discuss is Distinguished Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center and author of The Irony of Modern Catholic History, George Weigel. George, you know Cardinal Pell and have been following this case since the beginning. He was found guilty of sexual abuse in December of 2018, sentenced to 6 years in prison. He then appealed his sentence. That was upheld on a 2-1 ruling. Going into the final appeal to the High Court, there were many who thought this would be thrown out. They wouldn't even hear the case. Why do you think they accepted it and offered this unanimous decision?
I think they accepted the case, Raymond, because the one dissenting judge in the appellate hearing last summer wrote a devastating dissent that eviscerated those who upheld the conviction and indeed eviscerated the whole case. The High Court of Australia has been concerned for some time about the state of the criminal justice system in the state of Victoria. So I think there was a reasonable hope that the High Court would look carefully at this case, as it manifestly did, and realize that it never should have been brought in the first place. Further, the High Court accepted the dissenting judge's opinion from last August that to base a conviction solely on the credibility, the alleged credibility of the complainant, with no physical evidence that the crime was committed, with no corroborating evidence that the crime was committed, and with 24 defense witnesses saying the crime could not possibly have been committed, that this was a false verdict and a false upholding of that verdict by 2 of the 3 appellate judges last August. So the High Court did the right thing and struck a blow for presumption of innocence, guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, some fundamentals of criminal law in our Anglosphere legal world.
Yeah. George, it should be said, the evidence here was always shaky. I mean, one of the accusers overdosed on drugs, but before he died, told his mother that the cardinal did not abuse him. The other alleged victim claimed to have been abused in a sacristy. There were no corroborating witnesses, even though it supposedly occurred during a bustling post-mass moment. There's just no way no one would have seen this happening. It's too big a thing. How did this case even get to this point? And do you believe Cardinal Pell was the fall guy for the church in Australia and its handling of abuse cases?
I think it's certainly the case, Raymond, that Cardinal Pell was the victim of a lynch mob atmosphere in Australia that had been created, frankly, deliberately over many, many years. The media attack on Cardinal Pell goes back decades. What is truly bizarre about all this is that it was Cardinal Pell, when he was Archbishop of Melbourne, who instigated the first serious reform of how the church handled clerical sexual abuse cases. For him to be the fall guy in public opinion for the crimes and sins and negligence of his predecessors was really quite awful. Moreover, as you say, it was clear to anyone willing to look at the evidence adduced by the prosecution in this case that what was alleged to have happened simply could not have happened in the place where it was alleged to have happened, or in the time frame it was alleged to have happened. So if you ask yourself, okay, then how does a jury reach a guilty verdict? I think you have to look at the public atmosphere. If you ask yourself, how could the appellate bench uphold that conviction? It's because of this notion that the credibility of the complainant is the sole issue at stake here. That simply can't be the case. That means that anyone is presumed guilty if someone finds a complainant credible. This is a reversal of the common law tradition.
Yeah. Prior to his trial, Cardinal Pell was the prefect of the Vatican's Secretariat for the Economy. He was charged with reforming the Vatican finances by Pope Francis. Now, though he's been cleared of all these charges, George, Cardinal Pell's reputation has been ruined by this. Where does he go from here in terms of his public, the appreciation of his reputation publicly and in Rome? There's supposed to be a canonical trial. Do you think there will be one?
No, there's not going to be a canonical trial, and there never could have been, because you can't have a canonical trial without the person being tried present, and the cardinal couldn't have been present. There's no point in a canonical trial. The cardinal has been acquitted and declared innocent by the highest court in Australia. End of story. I do not accept that Cardinal Pell's reputation has been ruined. What I believe is that the reputation of the criminal justice system in the state of Victoria has been severely compromised, that the reputation of the Australian media, and particularly the public broadcasting network, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation in Australia, has been severely wounded. Cardinal Pell has been vindicated. Let's stop saying, as others have said, that his reputation is in tatters. He has a great role to play in the church going forward, and I look forward to him playing.
Now, the Pope at his Mass following Cardinal Pell's acquittal mentioned something in his intentions that he later tweeted out. It was this: "In these days of Lent, we've been witnessing the persecution that Jesus underwent and how he was judged ferociously even though he was innocent. Let us pray today for all those persons who suffer due to an unjust sentence because someone had it in for them." What do you make of the Vatican reaction to this? They say they welcome this acquittal.
Well, I thought the Pope's comments at Mass this morning and in that tweet were entirely appropriate. I'm sure he had many other circumstances in mind, but what he described certainly fits the case of Cardinal Pell. I thought the Vatican press office statement was tepid at best. Throughout this process, the Vatican press office has been saying how much it respected the Australian judicial system when there was no reason to extend that respect, when it had manifestly failed, as its own high court now says that it did. So I think enough of that kowtowing from the Vatican press office is enough. An innocent man has been vindicated and liberated. Last night, Cardinal Pell celebrated Mass for the Carmelites in Melbourne, the first time he has been able to attend or celebrate Mass in over 400 days. That's great good news, but that it happened is a disgrace. And that disgrace needs to be investigated. How could this have happened?
Well, I asked Cardinal Burke this earlier. I'll ask you the same question. Should the church raise its voice, given the injustice of this entire sham trial, the way information was peddled in the media there, books? I mean, people have no idea, George, if they haven't been watching this or have contacts in Australia, how this has been played in the media there. Best-selling books, the documentaries, all of this. It was a daily deluge against this man's reputation. What should the church's position be now, both in Australia and maybe at the Vatican, to right this injustice that not only is I think, focused on Cardinal Pell, but on members of the church at large?
I think the church in Australia has to do its best to make clear that it believes, that its leaders believe, that an innocent man has been vindicated. I would leave it at that for the church. The responsibility for dealing with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, which has been conducting a Pell witch hunt for years, and the responsibility for dealing with a manifestly dysfunctional, if not corrupt, criminal justice system, including the police in the state of Victoria, that seems to me to rest with the Australian Parliament. And in the piece I wrote on this last night that's available at Catholic World Report, I called for a parliamentary inquiry into the role of ABC, Australia's version of PBS here in the US, or BBC in Britain, a parliamentary inquiry into ABC's role in this and its possible collusion with the Victoria Police Department in bringing manifestly false charges against an innocent man. That's up to the government to clean up its own house.
George Weigel, thank you for the time, for the insight. The irony of modern Catholic history, how the Church rediscovered itself and challenged the modern world to reform, by George Weigel, is available at bookstores everywhere. Happy Easter, George, and at least we have another thing to celebrate in this quarantine.
Thank you, Raymond. Good to be with you.
Thank you. My next guest has followed the case of Cardinal Pell through the Australian court system from the beginning, oftentimes serving as a source to various news outlets. He joins us now from Australia. Welcome back to the program, John Macaulay. John, the High Court wrote in its opinion the assumption that a group of choristers, including adults, might have been so preoccupied with making their way to the robing room as to fail to notice the extraordinary sight of the Archbishop of Melbourne dressed in his full regalia, advancing through the procession and pinning a 13-year-old boy to the wall is a large one. To what do you attribute the outlandishness of this case and the media furor surrounding it, John?
Today, the Chief Justice took less than a minute to hand down a unanimous decision, and it focused on 3 points. The very fact that the Archbishop would spend 20 minutes on the foot of the cathedral after every Mass, the very fact that the choristers would find themselves in a very busy cathedral, and also, importantly, the interim period of time for the Archbishop and the procession to get back to the sacristy. It was logistically impossible, Raymond, for the things that have been accused of the Cardinal to happen, and the High Court's finally come through with that decision and made it unanimous and emphatic in their decision this morning.
What's been the reaction to the acquittal of Cardinal Pell in Australia, given the media pounding that he's taken really for years now?
The country is more divided than ever on the incarceration of Cardinal Pell. That's largely a function of the fact that there was a suppression order during the trial. So all of the exculpatory evidence that was tendered in the court wasn't given any airtime by the media. The media only got onto this after the suppression order was lifted by the court, and therefore it's only been bad news for the Cardinal, bad news regarding his story. And it's very important that people now actually look at the facts of the case and recognise that there has indeed been a travesty of justice, that Cardinal Pell spent 404 days in prison, but tonight he's actually spending his first night at a Carmelite monastery. He's just had his first meal. It was a steak, and he went on to say his first private Mass in 404 days.
Amazing. Yeah, George Weigel and I were just discussing. Cardinal Pell has indicated that he would like to remain in Australia, near family and friends. However, there have been death threats against him. Last month, a man was arrested for making a bomb threat against Cardinal Pell. Is it safe for the Cardinal to remain in Melbourne or anywhere in Australia?
Australia is a safe country. Unfortunately for Pell, I would not recommend he walk the streets even of our safer cities in the course of the months ahead. Just this morning, outside of Her Majesty's Prison Barwon, as the media were gathered, I stood there and car after car, truck after truck would wind down their window as they drove past the front of the prison and say things like "hang thee," followed by expletives that I can't repeat on this channel. So the media has stirred up an extraordinary amount of hatred, and I think the safest place for him tonight is, in fact, in the Carmelite monastery. By coincidence, he's in very saintly company. The relics of St. Therese of Lisieux and her saintly parents, Zélie and Louis, are in fact themselves in lockdown under the COVID-19. They were meant to be touring Melbourne this week, but they were returned to the nearest Carmelite monastery. So he's in the company of some wonderful nuns, but also in the company of three great saints.
You think he'll stay there?
No, I imagine his visit there would be for more of a spiritual retreat to resume the sacraments. I'm sure he has expressed, obviously, his desire to stay in his hometown here in the southern part of Australia, Melbourne. But I can't imagine that being foreseeable. I do imagine him needing to head either further north or abroad.
Yeah. The Australian Bishops' Conference put out a statement following Cardinal Pell's acquittal. It reads this way: "Today's outcome will be welcomed by many, including those who believed in the Cardinal's innocence throughout this lengthy process. We also recognize that the High Court's decision will be devastating for others. Many have suffered greatly through the process, which has now reached its conclusion. The safety of children remains supremely important, not only for the bishops, but for the entire Catholic community." John, why so defensive in what seems to be a case of gross injustice, not seems, is a case of gross injustice against Cardinal Pell? Solitary confinement, there have been horrible books written, sham documentaries. Is the church being too conservative here in its reply?
That particular statement from Archbishop Coleridge, the president of the Bishop Statement, is one thing. But Rome itself came out a few hours ago and said that it had full faith in the Australian justice system. I can't understand how anyone could claim that today was a great day for justice in Australia. If the police had examined the material, they should have recognised the impossibility of this. The fact that Cardinal Pell has incurred millions of dollars in legal fees, the fact that a man has to go to these extents to demonstrate what should have been patently obvious at the very first police investigations, proves that there's actually something deeply wrong with the justice system here. And I don't think the Bishops' Conference understand that. I don't think even Rome understands just how much the Cardinal himself and now all Catholics have become fodder for the judicial process, because now the media are no longer reporting on judicial processes. They're actually influencing the outcomes. They tainted the jury pool in Melbourne, so we should not be surprised at this outcome.
Well, these bishops should take a hard look. Today it's Cardinal Pell. Tomorrow it's going to be one of them. Watch what happens. Is this the end of this Pell affair, if you will? According to the UK newspaper, the Daily Mail, despite walking free, the Cardinal currently faces 10 other potential civil lawsuits claiming that he either molested other boys or helped cover up abuse by fellow priests. Is this going to go on and on, John?
If anyone had any evidence that Cardinal Pell had committed any indictable offence, which includes the non-reporting of child sexual abuse, they have had decades to present that material to the police. And in fact, if they did not do so, or they delayed in so doing, they themselves are committing an indictable offence. So put up or shut up is the message that needs to be put forward. And the very fact that that opportunity has existed, the very fact that Cardinal Pell has been very high profile from his installation as Archbishop in 1996 would suggest that there's a lot of muckraking going on. But to be quite frank, I can't see there any likelihood of further criminal action, and I don't see any basis for there being any civil proceedings against him either. So I think there's a lot of distraction being created because people don't want the key story to get out that an innocent man has just spent 404 nights in prison, falsely convicted.
John Macaulay, thank you for your insights and for tracking this case all along, and happy Easter.
And to you.